What's up, YouTube? It's Joe Catchpolia sitting on the couch making some money investing in fractional real estate online as usual. Today I'm going to talk about one of Mogul's recent listing, the O'Hara. This is actually not their most recent. They have another one called the Dean. I'm going to put out another short video about hopefully later tonight. But this property, the O'Hara, is an 8-bedroom, 9-bathroom, 6,500 square foot property in Whitehaven, Pennsylvania. This is basically another property in the Poconos region, which I've done a few videos on properties there now. I think a couple, but it is a vacation area in Pennsylvania. I know a lot of people when I lived and worked in and around Philadelphia, and also in and around New York. Both of those places, people vacation to the Poconos, so it's a short-term rental market I'm somewhat familiar with. This property is, if I were going to buy in true vacation markets, this is the type of property I would buy. This is, if I'm for my own account, right? When I'm buying individually, I say that because, and if you haven't heard me say it before, I'm not a big fan of buying in pure vacation markets, because values are tied so closely to tourism. And if for some reason there's issues with that, so for example, here in San Antonio, short-term rentals do very well if you have the right type of property. If you have a big home with a pool and the right amenities, you can get fantastic, rent to price ratios or revenue to price ratios, much better than we see in a lot of these ones listed on different platforms. But it's not a market where the price of the home is really dependent on that market. So if for some reason you can't operate the property as a short-term rental anymore, it still has value just as a single family home that someone wants to live in. When you have a short-term rental in a true vacation market, you don't have that sort of backup intrinsic value, right? People don't want to live, and I'm sure there are some people that live in this town as their primary residence, but a large portion of the demand and therefore the value of these homes is as a vacation home. And so that's one of the things, one of the reasons why I like markets like San Antonio better than true vacation markets, where there are a lot of tourists that come here. There's a lot of demand for short-term rental, but there's just not. But there's still just this backup value of the property as a home that somebody is, there's just owner occupant demand. But plenty of people have made lots of money buying properties like this one in true vacation markets. You're going to have both seasonality and cyclicality due to economic factors. But if you buy right, I think you can still do perfectly well. Before I forget, I want to mention I'm planning to change the way I do these due diligence videos. You guys can tell, I'm sure, that I haven't had as much time to devote to the channel lately. I don't have time to, and all the there's more and more platforms popping up and putting out more and more properties, and so there's just no way I'm going to be able to do a thorough due diligence on every single property. I'm going to start doing videos like this where I share my thoughts, some thoughts and opinions of this. Share a couple of things that I thought were noteworthy as far as I'm going to, look at the AirDNA numbers, talk to you a little bit about the valuation and some extra info that I got from Mogul. And then just leave it open if you have specific questions that you want answered about properties, please do put it in the comments or jump in the Discord. I'm happy to talk more about any of these, and there's a lot of other people active in the Discord right now. If you don't know what I'm talking about, look in the description to this video. There's a link to a Discord channel I have set up. There's no cost. Nobody's, it's not a sales funnel. It's just a place for us to talk about this stuff. Also in the description of this video, I have links to all of the places where I'm currently invested in fractional real estate online. Just because I provide those doesn't mean I'm endorsing them. Some of them I'm taking my money off slowly. Some of them I've just sort of left on whatever I have. Please do your own due diligence on those in any properties that you see me talk about. But I would encourage you, jump in the Discord, ask questions, talk to people about these. If there are topics that make sense for follow-on videos, I might do those. But so I'm not going to look at the flood map, look at the crime map, look at maybe won't look at the valuation on every single one. I'm going to really just try to keep these a little bit quicker, give you my just initial take on them. And then as they're, and then maybe sort of, at a certain point in time, I'm just going to have to start doing sort of batches of them as well, like where, maybe point out something noteworthy. But we'll see, because I have, I think, a list of like 6 videos that I'm backed up on that I want to talk about some new platforms, some new things happening with other sites and whatnot. So all of my laziness aside, this property, it's huge. It sleeps, depending on what listing you look at, 20 or 30 people. It's been in operations for several years, or maybe just a couple years. But it has, multiple years of history, $309,000 in revenue last year, already booked $207,000 for this year, right? So there's clearly a lot of demand. They're predicting $292,000. I'll show you the AirDNA on this real quick, and I think that prediction, there we go. So this is the property itself. I found their listing. Okay, it says last year it was actually $209,800 in revenue, but only available for 330 days. And so what I believe happened is the management company booked those other days on a platform that doesn't show up. So the AirDNA is showing you Airbnb and VRBO. It might be pulling data from some other sites, but it doesn't show direct bookings and stuff. So I think that's where the disconnect is, right? Although 30 days and almost $100,000 in revenue does seem pretty tough. So I'm not exactly sure, but so far, Mogul, those guys, they haven't given me any reason to believe that they're just making up numbers at this point. So, sometimes when we see a disconnect like that, let me get back to AirDNA. But it's not the full days available. AirDNA thinks 257. Yeah, obviously, especially because there are peak vacation times. I think it's perfectly possible that the management company booked a year in advance and charged a premium for it. Now, do they charge $100,000 for that month? I don't know. Or booked several weeks, in advance as well. But it does seem strange that 35 days could make up that big of a difference. Although it also shows that this is only 34% occupancy. So maybe there were some days that it was occupied through another source, but still had showed available on here. Not completely sure how that could have happened. I did find the management company that is currently managing it and is going to continue managing it. One of the things I thought was kind of interesting is the address that this management company uses as their mailing address is actually the address of this property. So I thought that was pretty strange. They call it is it this one? Secluded Mountain Castle, I think. Nope, that's not it. Which one is it? The Majestic Castle, I think is what they're calling it. This one. Well, let's go back. Yeah, so you can see like they really specialize in these high-end homes. They don't have a ton of properties, but the ones that they have, look fantastic. So, I like this type of property, right? This is what I like to see. One of the things, okay, the 292 for revenue. Let's say we believe that AirDNA is close. It says 257. We already have over 200,000 in bookings. I think that seems pretty reasonable. But okay, what if we do 292? And I didn't even talk about the purchase price yet. They're paying $2.125 million. So divided by 2.125. That's a 0.137 revenue to price ratio. I've talked about this before. It's just really low to me. I don't know how. I know here in town, this would not work at all. You wouldn't even have a positive cash flow. Maybe you would if you use the type of debt that Mogul's using, where it's interest only. But it's this is just really tight, and we've seen this in a lot of different markets. And, they're able to use that number and still predict year one revenue of 7.9%, year one, yield. But, I think, especially because my short-term rentals on this platform haven't performed very well, I really want a larger margin of error. And I think that, I'm not going to be buying these where they have, a revenue to price ratio in the low teens. Like here in town, I'm expecting close to 20%, maybe it's 18, maybe, but high teens to 20% revenue to price ratio is what makes a property work here in town. Now, a couple of things. I think our interest our insurance cost is probably higher. Our property tax as a percentage basis is probably higher. And so that might bump it up a little bit. But I think we're clearly, trying to get too close. I just think that we need more margin of error just because of how poorly a lot of my other short-term rentals are operating on here. I think 7.9% cash on cash return for a short-term rental, I'm just not sure I'm comfortable with it. I know they have, this is one that they're buying in place income, so it's history. So they call it core. I've talked before, I think it's really hard to think of a short-term rental property as a core property because you're not going to have predictable, stable, long-term income in the way that I would want with something that I think of as a core strategy. But anyway, so from that perspective, even though I really like the look of the property, I think it's the type of property that is going to do well, this year, but also forever, right? It has, and let me show you the, it's got the bells and whistles, right? Obviously it's set up kind of with the right decor, I think, for a mountain cabin. But it's got lots of bunk beds, lots of different living area, lots of different places people can sleep. Plenty of bathrooms. It's got this billiard room. It's got, video games. It's got a theater room. It's got this, which is like an indoor little swim spa. They spent like $70,000 on this amenity alone, maybe 75. This is all inside, and this pool is a recent addition since the previous sale. And I'm going to get into the reason I mentioned that is we're going to get into the valuation a little bit. But it's, it really has everything that I would want if I'm going to rent a place like this for, a large group to stay in. So yeah, I started talking a little bit about some of the money they spent. Why, where did that come from? Well, when we look at, we're paying $2.125 million. This estimate's $971,000. I think Realtor's estimate was similar. Yeah, $991,000. And Redfin, where was Redfin's? I always end up scrolling around and missing it when I do the video, even though I looked at it ahead of time. Sorry about that. I gotta like lock in. I know I'm always like starting to ramble. Where is it? Am I on the wrong page? I must just be missing it. Anyway, you can look on there. But this is what's important, right? Okay, it's sold in 2021 for $760,000. So even if I just thought those estimates are off, I'm trying to think, okay, we're almost 3 times as much as it sold for in the past. What's going on there? Well, I did ask the guys at Mogul, and they sent me a list of things that have been done to the property since that sale. And so you can see, remove some walls, open stuff up, blah, blah, blah. Okay, $22,000 spent on that, new flooring, installed a bar, all this stuff. Okay, $26,000. Converted the garage to a second game room. That, $7,000. This was cheap, but I think that's an amenity, that adds a nice amenity. New furniture, lights, thermostat, all this stuff. A lot of this stuff I think doesn't necessarily add value, but it is from a real estate perspective, but it is obviously adding value to your asset in your business there. Built a new deck and roof for the sauna and hot tub. I mean, this is huge, right? Spent $40,000 there. But then, that swimming pool, which is a huge swimming pool, large patio. It's got a slide. They added a gazebo. All this area back here. So let me go back to that picture. They spent $170,000 doing this, right? And I think, especially because they also had to clear it, that's money well spent in my mind for, when you have an asset like this. What were some of the other big ones? Replacing the deck, replaced the geothermal unit, converted the garage. Okay, this is the other one, to a swim spa room. And so that's what I was showing you over here. This room that they did with all the tile and this pool. And that's where I think they said, yeah, $75,000 on that. So I think overall this was like $480,000 they spent doing a really what I believe is a very complete renovation. Adding, they've got the sauna, they've got adding just all the amenities that you would want. And so, okay, if Zillow thinks, okay, it was sold for $760, but if it was just the same property sold today, which is kind of how Zillow looks at things, right? It doesn't know any of the stuff was on. So it thinks, okay, really it would be 9.7 today. Well, okay, that's without them realizing that all of this money was spent there, right? And so I think at a minimum, if I were trying to look at, okay, what's this really worth? I could probably just take that number and add it. And so that gets us to like around 1.45 million. And that's assuming you're not getting any like extra benefit from the work and time spent and all of that. And so that leads me to believe we're much closer than I was expecting initially, right? Because when I looked at it, it felt like we're paying twice what we should be paying. And when I look at the revenue to price ratio, it looks like we're paying significantly more than what we should be. But I think that, okay, understanding that the property that sold in 2021, I think I might have said 2001 before, but the property that sold in 2021 is, this isn't that same property, right? It's hugely different than it was there. And so in addition to just the movement of the market that Zillow understands should be going on or has gone on in that market, in addition to that, there was, almost $500,000 spent, a real transformation of the property. So I think that, at a minimum, there's some chance that it's worth that amount, but I think that it's still, in my mind, really reaching. Now, I know we always look at this and say, okay, do we have an appraisal contingency in the contract? I think I already looked for this, and I remember. Okay, let's see. Let's see about that. There's a prayer. This is how I usually find the specific stuff. And okay, come on. Oh, okay. So they don't have the appraisal contingency addendum in here. That's interesting to see. I'm sorry. I completely forgot. I looked at way too many properties today. If you're interested in buying this one, and that's, again, I'm going to just try to make these videos shorter. This is something I would dig into more, right? Make sure that there is a true appraisal contingency, because I wouldn't want to be in a situation where we're stuck buying this one at 2.1 million. In a situation where it doesn't appraise. Now, I know we've talked about this a lot before too, and this is the last thing I'm going to say about this one. I'll wrap it up. But this type of property is so hard for appraisers to appraise because it's not a cookie cutter property. I think it's on like 4.5. They say over 5 acres, but the listings online I think actually showed 4.5 acres. So, I don't know where the discrepancy is there, but like finding a property of this size with these amenities on 4.5 acres, you're not just going to find them all hanging out in this market, right? And so it's, even though I often say, hey, they're just cherry picking comps for something like this, that's what the appraiser has to do. They're going to have to go they're going to have to cast a much wider net looking for comps. and very often come up with a price that just matches the contract price. Like we see that repeatedly in this industry, especially, which is especially true when you have an asset like this, that it's not cookie cutter. There aren't close comparables. You can't just look at what the neighbor's home sold for and make a couple of adjustments, right? And so anyway, that's all I'm going to mention. All I want to talk about this property today. So that just to recap, one, I believe there are revenue projections, but I just want a bigger margin for error for short-term rentals with them now. One, because the ones that I have with them just have not been performing, and it's just really bringing me back to what I initially expected, which is a much higher revenue to price ratio when I'm looking at short-term rentals. I just think because of the cyclicality, because of the risk involved in running a business like that, you just have to I just want a higher return, a higher cash on cash return. I want to be able to, because that just gives you some leeway when things start to go bad to still be making money. If you're not quite hitting your projections, right? If I'm expecting 20 and then I lose 25% and I'm down to 15, look, I'm still making some money. If I'm only expecting 13.7, which is what it is here, and I lose 25%, maybe that now dips us into negative cash flow. And so, even though I love the look of the property, there's a ton that I like about it. I think it's perfectly possible that you do well with this. I'm not going to add it to my portfolio. It doesn't mean that's the right decision for you, right? I also have a lot more exposure to short-term rentals, and I do just have a personal preference for not being in true vacation markets with them. So that's all I've got to say about this one for today. If you have specific questions, put them in the comments or jump in the Discord and let's talk about them. If I have answers to them, obviously I'll share them. If we need to do a follow-up, we can do that. But let me know also, what do you think about this new format where I'm not really going to cover every single thing on the property? I'm just going to pick a couple things to talk about and that'll be it. If this doesn't work, the other thought that I've had is I'm just going to pick certain properties and I'm going to just have to start skipping properties that some platforms put out. Because like I said, there's just a whole bunch of other stuff that I want to cover that's going on in the fractional real estate world and just other stuff going on in life. I just don't have the time to devote to just putting out hours and hours of video every day. That's it for me for today. Until next time, I'm going to just keep making mistakes so that you don't have to.